After a long day of studying his favourite course, MEDN2001, Henry went and sat down to watch some TV when up came the classic Snickers ad.
Mike, what is your deal?
Eat a Snickers. Better?
Better.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
Then he started to wonder, what would it be like if he was in the ad? Hey Henry, you're not you when you're hungry. Here, have a Snickers. Oh, thank you so much, I will have a Snickers. If only Henry had remembered. He was allergic to peanuts. Let's take a look at the journey of this peanut and what's happening on the inside. So what happens when someone without a peanut allergy eats a Snickers? This is the process of oral tolerance. Proteins within the peanuts are broken down in the stomach by gastric acid and proteases, which release oligopeptides, small strings of amino acids from the peanut protein. Then, as food does, it travels along the intestines. On the wall of the intestines are a particular type of tissue called the Peyer's patches. On this tissue are M cells, which are intestinal epithelial cells. As the Snickers proteins pass by, the M cells quickly grab them and then pass it along to the antigen-presenting cells, or dendritic cells. As the name would suggest, the antigen-presenting cell presents the protein on its surface, kind of like a flashing light or waving flag, to get the attention of the helper T cell. After accepting the signal, this helper T cell is about to send off the alarm and start an allergic reaction. But remember, we are in a body of someone with no peanut allergy. So, regulatory T cells release molecules called cytokines. Cytokines act as a false alarm signal for the helper T cell, causing a process of anergy, which stops an immune response. So what is different in Henry's body? At what point along this system is something going wrong to make him have an immune response? Henry's response to Snickers can be broken down into two parts. The first time he ever had a Snickers, which is known as the first exposure, or sensitization, or every time after that where he had a Snickers, called the subsequent exposure. The first time Henry ever had a Snickers, the M cells transfer the proteins to the antigen-presenting cells, and the helper T cells bind to this flashing light or waving flag molecule on the helper T cell, just as happened before. Instead, this time, the helper T cell transforms into a type 2 helper T cell and releases its own cytokines, called interleukin-4. The interleukin-4 travels over to a new player in the game, a B cell, and tells it to change what antibodies it makes, from IgM to IgE. The new antibodies produced by the B cell are unique to the peanut. The new IgE antibodies then attach to a duo of cells, basophil cells and mast cells. This is the B cell's way of telling the basophil and mast cells that peanuts in Snickers are the new enemy and must be stopped at all costs. Now let's consider the second time Henry ate a Snickers, which causes a type 1 hypersensitivity response. The basophil mast duo bind the new antibodies to the peanut protein, causing cross-linking. This signals to the basophil mast cells that it's time to act, and they release out pro-inflammatory molecules like histamine from the cell body. Histamine spreads to the intestines and into the blood, binding to H1 receptors near the skin. The H1 receptor communicates that signal into the smooth muscle and skin cells, producing the responses of hives and itchiness. Blood vessels dilate and the permeability of the blood vessel walls increases, which means that the fluid inside of the vessels can leak into the space between the cells, causing swelling of parts of the body known as edema. Histamine can also cause muscles around the lungs to contract, meaning that breathing becomes more difficult and wheezy. Let's have a look at Henry after all of this has happened in his stomach. Warning, these photos are incredibly embarrassing. Luckily, it wasn't too long before Henry realized what had happened. His face started to swell and become red, his whole body started to itch, and his breathing became wheezy. He quickly ran to the medicine cupboard looking for something, anything that could help. Antihistamines are H1 receptor blockers. However, there are two types of antihistamines, first generation and second generation. Let's look at first generation antihistamines. The structure is composed of two aromatic rings connected to an ethylamine group. First generation H blockers are less picky or specific about which receptor they bind to, sometimes binding to the wrong one, such as cholinergic, alpha-adrenergic, and serotonin receptors. This leads to a number of side effects that we will discuss later. Second generation H1 blockers have a bulkier and less lipophilic structure. Second generation antihistamines are much more targeted to the H1 receptors. Second generation antihistamines provide the same relief of allergic reaction symptoms, but with less side effects. If you've taken any of the first year biology courses, you've probably learnt about competitive inhibition of enzymes, where a molecule will bind to the substrate site to block the actual substrate from entering, preventing a reaction. Antihistamines work in a very similar way to reversibly inhibit the histamine response. In a normal response, histamines bind to the H1 receptor, which then causes itchiness, breathing troubles, and edema. But if the H1 receptor is blocked, preoccupied with the antihistamine, the message to start changing the permeability of the blood vessels can't be communicated. As a result, the symptoms are reduced and breathing becomes easier. It's important to note that your body still thinks it's having an immune response. It is still trying to fight off the peanut protein, but the symptomatic expression of that immune response is diminished. You are still having an allergic reaction, but the presentation is a lot less severe. Most drugs have a list of seemingly scary side effects, and antihistamines are no different. Most people who take antihistamines don't experience these symptoms, and if they do, they're very minor. However, if you do start to experience any of these symptoms, it is important that you refrain from taking them before contacting your doctor. Dry mouth, drowsiness, dizziness, nausea and vomiting, restlessness or moodiness, trouble with urination, blurred vision or confusion. These are all cited as side effects for antihistamines. However, if you're choosing between dry mouth and this, I'm going to stick with the antihistamine. Another interesting question is, why do some antihistamines make you drowsy while others don't? This all comes down to the generation of antihistamine you're taking. As I previously mentioned, the chemical structure of generation 1 antihistamines makes them less specific to the receptor that they bind to, and able to cross the blood-brain barrier. In the brain, histamine has an important role in regulating sleep and wakefulness by attaching to different H receptors in the brain. Generation 1 antihistamines bind to those receptors, thereby altering the patterns of sleep and causing drowsiness. Generation 2 antihistamines, on the other hand, cannot cross the blood-brain barrier and are more targeted to the H1 receptor, therefore not resulting in the same drowsiness. Zyrtec, that Henry took, is a generation 2 antihistamine, so he's not showing the same symptoms of drowsiness. There are some general principles when taking antihistamines. It's really important to not double up on taking antihistamines or take two different types of antihistamines at the same time, or combine antihistamines with other medications. This is because some antihistamines are combined with pain medication or decongestants. This can lead to an overdose of those secondary medications and exposing yourself to further complications. The first generation antihistamines are becoming less frequently used in therapeutics due to the increased likelihood of drowsiness and interference with rapid eye movements during sleep. Studies have shown poorer school performance with children with allergic rhinitis treated with sedating antihistamines compared to children treated with non-sedating antihistamines. The Global Allergy and Asthma Network recommended making these type of antihistamines over-the-counter only. Sedating antihistamines also shouldn't be taken for acute allergic reactions because the sedative effects may mask a deterioration in consciousness caused by the underlying allergic reaction, indicating the onset of anaphylaxis and the requirement of adrenaline or an EpiPen. Patients with severe liver or kidney dysfunction are recommended to have a reduced dose so as to not overwhelm the organs with the breakdown of the drug. Luckily, after taking the Zyrtec, Henry didn't experience any extreme edema or itchiness because the H1 receptors were blocked. He thought next time he'd just stick to Mars bars instead. I hope you've learned a lot about the allergic reaction response, but more importantly, how a simple antihistamine can help. It's an incredibly interesting field of pharmacology, and I encourage you to do some further reading or research if you're at all interested, or if you're like me and have an allergy. Learning more about your own health and your body's response helps you to understand what exactly is going on and why the next time you eat that Snickers. So thanks for watching.